Americans are durable. We take pride in hard work and high quality. American Giant makes durable, quality clothing right here in the USA. Because what we wear reflects who we are. When you buy American Giant, you're not just wearing the best clothes money can buy. You're helping keep jobs and pride in your own backyard. Premium clothing built to last decades, like it should. Get 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com with code RightHere24.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you email me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Today we have Tony Wright. That's W-R-I-G-H-T. The book is called Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five. This is a fascinating story from way back from 1978. Now, you can find Tony Wright on Twitter. It's Tony Doug Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. You can find his books at geniusbookpublishing.com. And on Instagram, you can find him at Tony Wright Author. Mr. Tony Wright, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks, Ed.
No, thank you so much, man. It's a fascinating story way back from 1978. Before we get into Things Aren't Right, the disappearance of the Yuba County Five, tell us about yourself. Who is Tony Wright?
I'm an archivist, and I work in local government. So I've been working in archives and records management since 1997. I'm a first-time true crime writer. I'm a historian, a lost soul of rock and roll, and a Midwesterner with a wonderful family.
There you go. Now, this story goes way back to 1978. Well, how did you come across this thing?
It was 2018 when the case was brought back into the spotlight. Podcasters and YouTube channels had discovered the disappearance of the Yuba County Five. So the case was being discussed on YouTube channels like Criminally Listed and Bedtime Stories. And I found the story to be very heartbreaking but oddly fascinating. I wanted to read a book about the Yuba County Five case. I thought someone had written a book on the case, and when I went to check Amazon or my local library, nothing was available. A book had not been written. So I decided, hey, I can do this. I'm a historian. I'm a researcher. I can interview people who were involved with the case, the families, and everyone else in between, and get a complete story, because I felt at the time, while the story was completely fascinating, it kind of seemed incomplete on these podcasts and YouTube channels that you only got a little bit on the surface and you didn't get the full story. So I decided to write the book, which turned out to be Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five.
Yeah, very well received on Amazon. Almost 5 stars. And then, like you said, they call it the Bible of this story here. So, okay, where do we get started? Who's the Yuba County Five?
They were 5 friends from Northern California. They lived in the Yuba County area, which is north of Sacramento. And the 5 men were Ted Weiher, who was 32. You had Jack Madruga, who was 30. You had Bill Sterling, who was 29. You had Gary Mathias, who was around 25 years old, and Jackie Huett, who was around 23, 24 years of age. 4 of the men had developmental disabilities. That was Ted Weiher, Jack Madruga, Jackie Huett, and Bill Sterling. And Gary Mathias had been diagnosed with schizophrenia in the early 70s. But they were all part of a program called the Gateway Project. And that was an organization in Northern California that provided job training and job skills for people with disabilities and mental illness. Plus, they did a little bit of life coaching. So all 5 men grew up in Northern California. They all knew each other. Some were neighbors, like Ted Weiher and Gary Mathias, and to an extent, Jackie Huett. They loved basketball. They loved roller skating. They loved to go to dances. They enjoyed life, held menial jobs, but still jobs that brought in some income, had family that loved them, nieces and nephews that they would spend time with, and were generally good guys in the community. And they played for a basketball program called the Gateway Gators, which was through the Gateway Projects, and it was a Special Olympics basketball team. So that was another passion of theirs. And the Yuba County Five disappeared on February 24th, 1978, after attending a basketball game at Chico State University. Their favorite basketball team, UC Davis, had an away game. They wanted to go see the team play because it was getting towards the end of the season. And on the next day, which would have been February 25th, they had their own Special Olympics basketball tournament near Sacramento. So this was a bit of motivation for the Five to go out, see their favorite basketball team, and then the next day go to their basketball tournament, because the winner could advance to the state Special Olympics tournament down in Los Angeles, where they would participate in games at UCLA, and they would receive tickets to Disneyland. So this was something big and something very important to these guys. And for the Yuba County Five, these guys had traveled out of town together to places like Sacramento or Chico, either as a group or certain members of the group, and they would make successful journeys out of town. They would go to basketball games, they would go play mini golf, or they would do something like roller skating, just anything, bowling. And they've never had any history of getting lost. So the Yuba County Five, when they disappeared on Friday, February 24th, 1978, it was a real mystery, because these guys are supposed to drive home and they just vanish off the face of the earth.
Okay, now they're described as intellectual disabilities, and they were part of this Gateway Project. Now, were they able to, you said they had jobs. Now, were they able to live alone? Did they have supervision? Did they have, was there a conservator? Was there guardians that were taking care of these guys?
I mean, with the intellectual disabilities and talking to some of the family members, they believe if what people know today, that some of the men would be on the autism spectrum.
Interesting.
And I think for Ted Weiher, Jackie Huett, and Bill Sterling, there would have been a need to maybe have some supervision for them. They could live independently, but I think each face their own trials and tribulations, but it wasn't anything too terrible. I mean,
right.
They had menial jobs. They worked with Pacific, like Ted Weiher and Jackie Huett worked with Pacific Gas and Electric doing some work winding cable. I know Jack Madruga worked for Sunsweet Growers as a dishwasher at one of their facilities. And Jack Madruga had even served in the military. Bill Sterling had a job at a local Air Force base. He also worked with Jack Madruga at Sunsweet Growers. So they did have job experience. It's just that they were all living with their families. And they did lead independent lives, but they were very close to their families, and it was important that they have some supervision, but it was not a problem for these guys to go out of town and do something and then come back. They had done it before many times successfully.
You know, not only that, but, you know, I'm 61 years old now, so 1978 I was about 17 years old. And back then, you know, to have an intellectual disability back in those days, like, you know, compared to today, like the average guy has what we would consider to be a disability back in those days. Average guy today at that age, they can't use the phone. They only want to text. They have social anxiety, all this kind of crazy stuff now. All this diagnosis is on these spectrums. So back then, you know, it wouldn't, to be considered to have an intellectual disability, like today would be more common. Like a lot of people talking to themselves and can barely function these days. So that's an interesting aspect to all this. What was considered disability back then compared to what is now. Right.
And I would say for them, I think for Jack Madruga, he was considered slow. I think that was a word they were using with some of the guys. They were just slow.
Right.
Whether it could be having some sort of disability when it comes to learning or processing their thoughts and emotions. It's hard to tell, not having anything to really look at as far as like a video or hearing an audio recording of these guys to get a better understanding. I know with like Ted Weiher, he was someone who, according to his family, lacked common sense, where he would ask, why do you stop at the stop sign? And there was a time when his sister was driving him somewhere, and she pulls up to an intersection, and there's a stop sign, and so she looks her way and says, Ted, is a car coming? He goes, no. So she pulls out in the street and immediately slams on the brakes, and there's this truck barreling down the road. She looks at him and says, Ted,
Oh, no.
I asked you if there was a car coming. He's like, yeah, you told me there's a car coming, but you didn't say anything about trucks.
Gotcha.
And she's like, Ted, come on, man. But with Ted Weiher, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Jackie Huett, I mean, the family members did say they did have disabilities. It could be more learning disabilities. It could be more about maybe understanding certain situations and maybe comprehending certain situations, which might have been a struggle for them. But overall, they were able to get jobs. They went through high school. They graduated. They spent time with their families. And like I said, they were leading productive lives. And to fully know the extent of their disabilities is a little bit hard because a lot gets lost over 46 years in memories with some people. And the information we had was a bit limited.
Now, let me ask you this, because it's February 24th. Now, when they're planning this trip, and it says here they're going through these mountains. What was it?
In the Plumas?
Yeah, the Plumas National Forest in Northern California. So they're going through these mountains, right? These national forests. There's snow on the ground. It's February 24th. Was there any concern before they left for this trip, their family saying, hey, this might be too much for them?
I know that they were a bit concerned about going to the game because the next day they had the big trip to Rockland.
Right.
And I think the concern was more like, are you going to be a little tired for your big basketball game tomorrow? This seems like a big trip. It's late in the day. But the family said, hey, they really want to go. They like basketball. And for them, all they had to do was drive from the Yuba County area, which, if you look at the city of Marysville, it connects to Chico through a highway, which is Highway 70 in California. And to the west of that is Highway 99, which runs out of Yuba City. So Jack Madruga would have been able to drive them straight up to Chico for the game. And the day before, they had basketball practice in Sacramento. So they actually drove to Sacramento on Thursday, the 23rd, to go to a school to have a basketball practice, and they drove back home successfully. Because normally they would have basketball practice in Yuba City, but the school was closed on the day they wanted to have basketball practice for an event. So they kind of scrambled and called around some schools to find an open gym for the 23rd, and the only available gym was in Sacramento. And that's about, I don't know, maybe a 35, 45-minute trip for them. They went to Sacramento and back, did very well. When they went to Chico, they more than likely took Highway 70 out of Marysville, California, to go up towards Chico. Now, when they went home, they could have taken either Highway 70 or Highway 99, but they didn't. What they did near the town of Oroville, California, is go on to the Oroville-Quincy Highway, which goes through the town of Oroville. That highway led them into the Plumas National Forest, which is in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. That area looks nothing like the region where they lived in Yuba City or Marysville, or even where they traveled to Chico. Those areas are flat. Once you start going up into the Oroville-Quincy Highway into the Plumas and the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, the roads are winding. There's sort of rocky terrain, pine trees. You'll see snow on the ground. The temperature's going to start to drop. The elevation's getting higher. And Jack Madruga was driving the five men in his 1969 Mercury Montego, and he should have known by driving through Oroville that that's not going to get him home back to Marysville or even Yuba City. So the trip through the Plumas and seeing the signs, if they did see him, for the Plumas National Forest and the winding roads and the changes in terrain and definitely the snow, would have been an indicator, hey, it's the wrong direction, let's just turn it around, head back to where we were and get back on 70 or 99. And 70 would have made more sense because that's right off of Oroville. So their trip into the Plumas wasn't planned. And to get there, it's quite... I've made 2 trips through the Plumas to the area where they abandoned the car, and it's a, I hate to say a tedious trip, but it's nice, beautiful area, but at the same time, it's a really long trip on these winding roads, and you're probably going certain speed at spots where it's kind of slow moving. So with these guys getting into the situation they were in, where they went into the Plumas, was completely out of character because there should have been no reason for them to be on the road that led them that way.
Do we know if this is a 4-cylinder car, 8-cylinder, 6-cylinder?
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
The car, was it a 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder? Do we know?
Oh, I don't remember.
Okay.
But if you know the Montego, 1969, it was 2-door.
Yeah, a little compact, right? Yeah.
I don't know if it was compact. No? I think it might be a 6-cylinder, but I can't remember. So I think if we have some car experts out there, love to hear their input on that. But I don't remember. But I mean, it was a pretty good sized car for the time.
Do we know if they had a map in the car?
Yes, they had maps in the car. So there were 4 sets of maps. One was a general map of California. One was a map of the Bay Area. I think one map was Southern California, possibly the Los Angeles area. And another map would have been the Sacramento area. So with these maps, one was out, and I believe it was the map of California. But what's interesting about some of these maps of California during the 70s, and I've looked at a few digitized collections online, the roads that go through the Plumas National Forest, especially the Oroville-Quincy Highway, are not fully shown going through the Plumas. On some maps they do, some maps they don't, and I don't know if they had something like a Rand McNally map or AAA or what the maps you could get at gas stations at the time. So that was kept in evidence with the Yuba County Sheriff's Department, and of all the files I could see, I wasn't allowed to see that because it was considered evidence, and so it was stashed away.
Yeah, those maps in those days, if you had a big, giant foldable map, it's a chore just finding out where you are on that map. Where am I now? Yeah, that was no joke back in those days. I drove car service for a while, and I got lost almost every night.
Yeah, and the map was out, but
oh, really?
We don't know if the map was used to get to Chico, or if the map was used for that night, or even if the map was used the day before to get to Sacramento. The map was out for a reason, but the big question is why they get off the highway and start going a way that is just way off the beaten path. Because where they eventually end up is this abandoned road in the Plumas National Forest where they get their car stuck in the snow. They all get out of the car and go into the Plumas National Forest, below freezing temperatures, snow, and they're wearing tennis shoes, jeans, and light jackets. So this just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
What about when they're at this, because they took this trip to go to a basketball game? Do we have any witnesses who could describe what their condition was? Were they drinking? Were they smoking? Were they?
Gotcha. Yeah, there was a guy who saw them at the game because once the men went missing, the families were able to get missing persons information out to the media. And one of the guys who saw the men at the game was the editor of the newspaper in Chico, California, because he said, hey, I'm at the game. I remember looking over and he saw the guys sitting with the UC Davis fans. They were pretty reserved guys. They were cheering. They were enjoying themselves, just hanging out. As far as a group, I mean, they have had gone out with other friends to drink beer at times, but they really weren't that kind of wild party bunch. I mean, a couple of people in the group maybe have smoked cigarettes, but these weren't any wild children of the 70s. And the person who saw them at the game, like he said, they were pretty reserved, kind of just hanging out, enjoying a basketball game on a Friday night. But after the game, they went to a convenience store to get some snacks, and they bought like candy bars and Langendorf or Hostess pies, and they purchased some milk and maybe some pop and got in their car to go home. So if that's the kind of stuff they're buying, it was,
True.
Nothing wild and crazy. Like they weren't buying like a fifth of vodka or something like that, or packed cigarettes. They just bought junk food and milk and pop and jumped in the car, and that was the last time someone saw them face to face. Now, someone else would see them later that night on the road where they abandoned the car, but that's where we get some more question marks there with the reliability of the witness.
But we do know that the car was stuck in snow. There's indications they tried to dig themselves out, and it's got 5 guys. You can't push a car out of a snow with 5 guys.
I thought of that as well. I mean, I live in the Midwest. I grew up in the Midwest. We have pushed cars out of the snow many times. But where these guys grew up in Northern California, Marysville, Yuba City, Olivehurst, even some of the guys lived in Eureka, California for a while. I don't see them doing much as far as experiencing the snow. So they may not be as skilled or as familiar with pushing a car out of the snow as maybe someone who's living in the Midwest or out in the Northeast, something like that. And that's a good question. And if they did get stuck in the snow, would they have tried pushing it out? And when they found the car, they could tell that the tires had been spinning and they were trying to get out, but they left the car and went into the Plumas National Forest, but the way they went was not down the road back the way they came. They went up the road further into the Plumas. And there was basically nothing up that way. And it was sort of just a journey into the darkness, the snow, and the freezing temperatures.
Fascinating. Did they stay on the road or they went off the road?
So when they got on the Oroville-Quincy Highway, once they got into Oroville, they followed it into the Plumas National Forest. And then they turned on a road near a place called Rogers Cow Camp, which is basically near what was the snow line for that area. They drove the car up the road, which was unpaved and rutted, which was out of character for Jack Madruga, the driver, because he took great pride in this car. He disliked unpaved roads. He disliked the fact that he might have to drive over a pothole. And this road he was on had everything he disliked about driving. Snow, rutted roads, unpaved, probably dangerous conditions, but that's where they got the car stuck. And the road where they got the car stuck is just, it could have been used for logging purposes, and it didn't go anywhere. It wouldn't connect to a highway, it didn't connect to another state route. It just went nowhere into the woods. So to abandon your car at that spot, it's an unusual spot. I mean, it's basically the middle of nowhere in the Plumas.
And what time of night was this?
We know the game ended around 9:45, 9:50 p.m. They went to the convenience store before 10 p.m. They probably were back on the road sometime between 10 p.m. 10:15 p.m. From there, the witness who claims to have seen them in the Plumas can't verify 100%, but they said between 11 p.m. and midnight. And that's when they show up to the area, according to a witness.
So there just happens to be another guy driving around in the snow in these mountains on that safe in the middle of the night?
Exactly. His name was Joseph Shones. He lived in the area. He had stopped at a couple places earlier in the evening to have some beers, and he took his car, which was a Volkswagen Bug, and he got his car stuck on the same road as they did, as the Five. But Joseph Shones actually did live in the area. He was well familiar with the conditions, especially in the winter. I mean, it's not an easy place to get around. And a lady that saw him drinking beer watched him leave, and he went and drove his car up to the place where he got it stuck, and she said, "That's so strange. Why is he going that way? He's going to get his car stuck. He should know better." And so he gets his car up there. It's stuck. He's in a tough spot. He tries pushing his car. Says he pushes it about 12 feet, starts having pain in his chest and believes it's a heart attack, crawls back into his car, lets it run, gets some heat going, and basically is suffering in his car from probably 6 p.m. until he sees the men around 11 p.m. and midnight. Depending on the story that you read or the story he gives to law enforcement, he either got out of the car to wave him down to say he needed help, or he had people approach his car with flashlights, and it kind of scared him half to death. But from what he has said, the car that Jack Madruga and the others were in pulls up to the same road where he's stuck. They get out of the car, and he believes there was a pickup truck behind them, following them into the Plumas and onto that road. The men either jumped into the back of the pickup truck or ran into the woods. And the story that Shones gives varies in great detail, and it's hard for us to get a clear picture of what actually happened that night on that road.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between walking into the woods and jumping in the back of a pickup truck. And also, too...
Absolutely.
And also, too, man, it's really a big coincidence that this guy just happens to be having a heart attack the same night. Did he ever go to the hospital for this heart attack, pain?
We know that he eventually gets back in his car. He walks to one of the places where he was drinking beer the day before. He gets a ride back to his home, which is in the Plumas area. His wife and daughter come and see him. He tells them that the car is abandoned up in the Plumas. They go after the car. They come back and eventually send him to the hospital. So he does go to the hospital to get checked out.
Okay.
But due to, privacy laws, we don't know much about his trip to the hospital. We know he was there. We just don't know what the diagnosis was or any information about his visit.
Tony Wright, were you able to interview him or his family?
I could not interview Joseph Shones. He passed away years ago. His wife had passed away. And I interviewed people who knew him as a person. So I interviewed one of his neighbors, and I was able to talk to another person that did know him. And later I got to hear some more information from another individual that knew Shones. So it kind of solidified some things. Plus, when the Yuba County Sheriff's Department began investigating this case, they interviewed Shones twice and gathered up some previous information on him, and that helped me build his story from there.
Okay, we're talking to Tony Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, and the book is called Things Aren't Right. If there were a more apt title for a book, Things Aren't Right. The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five. Just so many questions here. Mystery upon mystery. Okay, now then what happens now? These guys don't make it home in time. The family starts calling the cops. They search. Is that what happens?
Right. So the families are waiting up for the guys to come home. And when they don't show up at a certain time, they start calling around saying, where are they? What happened?
Right.
And by, I would say early morning, between 6 and 7 a.m., they start calling other people saying, hey, the guys didn't come home last night. One of the family members goes to a Montgomery Ward department store to wait for the guys because that was the place they were supposed to meet to go to their Special Olympics basketball game, because that was a meeting point for everyone. And when the person went to Montgomery Ward, no one was there, and they kind of assumed that the group had already left for the game. Some people went to Chico to check the campus, check the gymnasium, they checked the highways to see if the car had broken down. They tried calling the Yuba County Sheriff's Department 8 a.m. on Saturday. They said they hadn't been missing long enough to warrant a missing persons report or something that they would call an attempt to locate. And families spent the day just doing what they could to get the word out, asking radio stations, television, these guys are missing, something's wrong. This is very uncharacteristic, because if these guys were to go somewhere, they were to go somewhere and come directly home. They weren't off to joyride or goof off or anything like that. They were, 5 guys who had a plan, stuck to it, came home, went to bed.
Yeah, no one would dream that they'd be driving around this Plumas National Forest, right?
Yeah, and I've been up there during the evening hours driving around. It's pitch black. It's middle of nowhere, and you kind of get this eerie presence of, if my car breaks down, is anyone around here? And it's not a place where you just go for fun.
And you got to worry about deer on the highway. That's a miserable drive at night, because you hit a deer one time, you never want to do it again.
No, I actually saw a deer going through the Plumas at night, and I thought, man, I'm glad that this deer was just kind of taking its time walking around the road and not running around. So it's...
Yeah, they'll jump right at your car. They'll stand there, they'll jump right at your car.
Yeah.
I know.
It's crazy. And for them to take the trip up into the Plumas, there's really no reason to make that kind of detour and add that time, because the spot where they abandoned their car was roughly 75 miles from where they lived, in the wrong direction.
When you're describing this, I started thinking, well, maybe they picked up a hitchhiker, but there's 5 guys. They can't squeeze another guy into that car. Or maybe one of the 5 pulls out a gun and says, hey, we're doing this. Any indication of something like that?
As far as the hitchhiker, that's something that they tried to think of as far as some sort of plausible scenario. When law enforcement asked the families, would they pick up a hitchhiker? Initially, the family members said, no, that doesn't seem like them to do something like that. But if someone had pulled a gun on them and started demanding something, the families were pretty much in agreement that these guys would comply and they would follow instructions.
But could you squeeze another guy into that car? If there's 5 already,
it seemed like there'd be 3 in the back, 2 up front.
Yeah.
And I don't know how the seats were in the car. I probably researched it one time, but if you could put someone in the middle of the front seat, because some of those cars did have that option. The old days, they didn't have the bucket. Yeah, they didn't have the bucket seats.
Bench.
It'd be possible, but that's something that seemed to be thought about or sort of theorized by law enforcement a few times. Someone may have had a gun and encountered these guys and sort of commandeered the car, telling the guys where to go. Because when you take that trip there's plenty of opportunities just to turn around and to go back where you started. This just doesn't, they're not like trapped on this trip through the Plumas. They have opportunities to stop, say, nope, this is wrong. We got to go home. We got to go back the way we came.
And I'm guessing, too, if there was any indication of a robbery, you would have mentioned that already. And if there was any indication of defensive wounds on these guys, what was I guess the next part of the story is they discover the bodies, right? Is that the next event?
Right. So they went missing February 24th. The car that they were driving was discovered February 28th by someone with the Forestry Service. So they had lost about 4 days of valuable time in the Plumas. Mm-hmm. But once they found the car, they began the search and rescue operation of searching the area. It actually included about 4 jurisdictions of law enforcement along with the state of California. So they're looking from the end of February through March, and I think they did some searching through parts of April. But it was early June 1978, when some guys who were riding some motorcycles around the Plumas went to near a place called the Daniels Inc. Campground, which is about 12, 15 miles from where they abandoned the car, and it's going northeast. They stopped at the Daniels Inc. Campground because there was a map there, and they probably wanted to find the best way home. When they got to the campground, they noticed that there was a distinct smell. They did some investigating. They found some trailers that were put up there by the Forestry Service. It's where some of the workers could stay and, overnight. And there was bunk beds in there, and there was food, and there were even propane tanks to heat the trailers. And when they went to one of the trailers, they found that one of the windows had been broken out.
No.
And in the trailer, they found the remains of Ted Weiher. And Ted Weiher was resting on he had died while in the trailer. He was on a bed. He had been tucked in and probably survived in the trailer for maybe a month or two. There were sea ration cans opened in the trailer. Someone had been eating some of the food that had been stocked in there. But at the time, they believed the snow had covered the propane tanks outside, and no one had turned on the propane to heat the trailer. But also, law enforcement didn't know if the guys knew how to heat the trailer, if they turned on the propane, and what steps they would need to take to heat it up.
Incredibly fascinating. These guys somehow managed to hike 12 miles with poor footgear, poor jackets, no food, no water. They find a shelter.
Yeah, and they said in the newspaper at the time, if these guys were to walk from point A to point B, because there's a road you would have to follow, but it's a winding series of roads, they said it was like a 1 in 1,000 chance they would have stumbled upon this place following the road. Now, if they were to walk across the terrain, it would be 5 miles northeast. But if you're walking across the terrain and you know anything about the Plumas, it's not smooth up there at all. The elevation goes from like 2,000 to 5,000 feet. You've got sort of these valleys and sort of very rugged areas. So these guys were in a very, very tough situation where they walked through the Plumas in the freezing cold and the snow to get from their car to a trailer. And Ted Weiher was found in the trailer, but at the same time, a few days later, they found the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling south of the trailer, a few miles away. And then after that, they found Jackie Huett's remains also south of the trailer, very much closer than Sterling and Madruga. Gary Mathias was never found. And his family and the others who have investigated the case and know about the case said that Gary Mathias had died in the Plumas National Forest at some point, but his remains were never found.
Ted Weiher was the driver too, right?
No, Jack Madruga was the driver. Ted was the oldest, but he was in the car. And
Ted found his way to the shelter. The other guys never made it to the shelter.
that's something I've talked about with family members, law enforcement, and people who have researched the case like Drew Beeson. We know that Ted was in the trailer. Some people believe that Gary Mathias and Jackie Huett made it there with him and stayed in the trailer for an unspecified amount of time. It's believed that Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling may have fell behind walking to the trailer, and they could have said something like, "We'll stop here and rest, but we'll catch up with you guys later." And I think maybe Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling could have died from exposure just because of hypothermia and the amount of time they were, out in freezing temperatures up in the Plumas. There is the possibility they could have made it to the trailer together as a group, and then at different times, people may have just tried going out to look for help. They may have stopped, tried to eat something, tried to rest, and then tried heading out for help, and they just didn't find help.
The conditions of the body, it was cold up there. Animal activity with the bodies, what's the condition of the bodies?
I know with Ted Weiher, he was found, he was the only person found as far as remains that he was in the cabin,
right,
untouched. His death, just, I must say it was natural for what happened. But Jackie Huett, Bill Sterling, and Jack Madruga, their bodies had decomposed, but their remains had been scattered by animals.
Right.
So for the coroner's report for Jack Madruga, Jackie Huett, and Bill Sterling, it was very hard for them to determine causes of death other than exposure or hypothermia.
If the car had not gotten stuck, were they driving in the direction of that trailer to begin with?
No, because the road would have been closed, if I'm not mistaken, because once you get up into the Plumas, you're going to see snow, and that year there was quite a bit of snow in the area, and it would have been very tough to get the Mercury through that snow. It just wasn't something that they could just plow through. It's not like they had like a 4-wheel drive vehicle.
Right.
There were even snow drifts up there, reportedly 4 feet, 5 feet, but some as high as 10 feet.
I tell you, I wish I had never heard this story. It's just too...
it's very,
yeah.
It's very
frustrating,
fascinating, and heartbreaking all at once, because, with my book, this is you're just hearing what's on the surface. There's more layers to this, and the things that were going on in their community at Gateway, where they did job training and had life skills, and the community at large. There was quite a bit happening, and then with the investigation and what did law enforcement know of the existence of these trailers, and why did they never check them?
Oh, wow.
It's quite the mystery, and to this day it's still unsolved why they went up into the Plumas National Forest. Many people believe it's because of their disabilities, but family members say that, especially Jack Madruga, the driver, would not have put them in this kind of situation where he would have taken them up into the Plumas. And they said, well, Gary had schizophrenia, he probably was responsible, but his family said that he was taking medication, he was managing his schizophrenia, he was seeing medical professionals, and manage everything to make sure his life was on the right track. Because there was a period of time where he wasn't taking care of himself, and he wasn't doing well personally.
Oh, what about medication? Were they on daily medications? Like today we have people taking anti-schizophrenia medication?
I know he was taking medication. I can't remember the name of he had 3 different medications,
right,
that he was taking.
Did he have his meds on him? Did he have his meds on him to continue taking them up in the mountains?
No, he wouldn't.
Oh my God!
Brought him with him. And people who have researched the case, like myself, we are of the opinion that Gary may have realized, I don't have my medication, I need to go find help.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not taking my medication, things are eventually going to take a turn for the worse.
Yeah, it's
And
already a
his doctor
stressful
said that-
situation.
Yeah, and with hypothermia definitely kicking in, it's hard to tell what kind of frame of mind these men were in at the time that they made that trip up into the Plumas National Forest.
We got about 8 minutes left, and the book is called "Things Aren't Right: The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five" by Tony Wright. Now, Tony, I'm guessing the story doesn't have a happy ending. Does the book have? How does the book end? You know?
Is there a happy ending to the story? I mean,
No.
At this point, no. There is no happy ending. There's still a lot of questions. It's still. I'm hoping that maybe this book jumpstarts someone's memory who lived in the area at the time, because there were rumors that the men were forced up that way, that they met with an individual, a group of individuals who may have threatened them in some way to go up that road or chase them up that road.
Yeah.
And I've heard a variety of stories, and if we can get the truth out of this, it would be great. But also, I think it was more important to get people to know who these five guys were, because when you hear the story, it just begins with them abandoning the car, and then there's Joseph Jones with his heart attack, and off we go with the story. But there was a backstory to all these guys. Ted Weiher, Jack Madruga, Jackie Huett, Bill Sterling, and Gary Mathias were all people. They had family, they had jobs, they had different passions in life and things that they enjoyed. People remembered all of them fondly and had very good memories to share. So I think that's important for people to learn more about the Yuba County Five as people, and to learn more about the case and what went on and how it was handled by law enforcement, and some of the theories out there that I have personally, and maybe talking to some other individuals as well about what happened the night of
real
February
quick, we only got about
24th.
4 minutes left. Like, who could they have run into? Like a biker gang or a meth lab type guys, and what?
That's what we're trying to figure out. First question is why they leave the highway and go through Oroville. Maybe they had to use the restroom. Maybe someone wanted to stop and use a payphone or something, and when they got into Oroville, they may have run into someone that they knew, or someone they ran into who may have been drunk and looking for a fight or causing trouble, and something went down and things just got progressively worse, and these guys were in some sort of situation where it was fight or flight or something like that. And it's possible could they have run into a motorcycle gang? It's possible. Could they have run into an individual with ill intentions? It's very possible. We can only theorize what happened. We could spend hours upon hours coming up, discussing theories about what happened to the Yuba County Five.
Right, but the thing is, to stumble on that shelter, you're saying is next to impossible.
From what law enforcement said about that area, and you look at the maps and the way that the roads connect up there, especially some of the side roads, off roads, it's hard to find. But one person said at the time that a snowcat had cleared some of the roads up there.
Okay.
And they may have followed that to the shelter. But that really wasn't in the sheriff's report. It was something that was reported in a newspaper probably June of 78 instead of February of 78 when it had been cleared. So we don't know exactly if the road was cleared as reported, because it does make sense for them to follow a clear road. But they're going up to the northeast instead of south on the road to get back to where they were. And if they had walked south, they could have stumbled upon some homes or places where they could have knocked and asked to use a payphone or a phone and called home for help. But they went to a trailer and they never set a fire. They never made any kind of signals to get someone's attention. So this is even more strange.
Fascinating. Who the hell knows what happened? This is really like a mystery upon a mystery. But their families, did any of their families say they were familiar with this Plumas National Forest area? Had they been there before?
Some of them had been to the area, but they never really cared for the outdoors. They weren't big on the snow and the cold and the dark. I think some of them enjoyed things like fishing and maybe doing some camping and things like that, maybe more summer activities that you would do up in that area. They weren't interested in winter activities because this was February, a lot of snow, a lot of cold, dark at night. So this wouldn't have been their kind of place to hang out. They had no interest in that.
So Tony, Wright, we have less than a minute. How do you live with this, not knowing the answer?
It's very frustrating because knowing the family members and getting to know them, it adds to the frustration and hearing, what they've gone through for over 45 years is very upsetting and heartbreaking because they know that people will say, well, they were lost because of a disability or because Gary went crazy, but they know better than that. And they felt since the time they went missing that these guys were forced up that way or someone was chasing them or something bad went down and no one, in their opinion, looked into the bad scenario that forced them up that road. They feel like it was just a bunch of guys who got lost because they were just a bunch of dummies according to society standards. And they felt that was sort of they still feel it's an unfair judgment of these men that they knew and that people only know today on the surface because of podcasts and other reports. And they're glad that there's a book like this out where people can get to know these guys and see who they were.
Once again, the book is called Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of Yuba County Five by Tony Wright, Wright. You can find it at geniusbookpublishing.com, on Twitter, Tony Doug Wright, and on Instagram, Tony Wright Author. Mr. Wright, thank you so much, man. If you any new clues or something comes up, give me a call, man. I'd love to hear more about this.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I really appreciate the time, and you can find the book at Genius Book Publishing. You can also find it at Amazon. I appreciate the great feedback from people, and if you want to know more about this case and want to read up the book, please do so. Feel free to reach out and discuss the case. I'm always available to listen to theories and hear what readers have to say about the book.
Yeah, if you got some tips, find Tony on Twitter, Tony Doug Wright, or on Instagram, Tony Wright Author. Tony, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed. You have a good day.
You too. Good night. Thank you.